Welcome to Uncorking the Issues, the podcast where we pour clarity into Temecula Valley politics. I'm your host, Grapevine. Today's episode is called Students Spoke. The adults debated themselves. Today we're talking about the January 13th, 2026 Temecula Valley Unified School District Board meeting. You know the one. The meeting where students showed up, prepared, researched, and respectful, and then watched the adults unravel in real time. Let's start at the beginning. The meeting opened with a moment of silence for two students who had passed away. The room paused. The message was clear. Every student is precious. That's not my phrasing. That's the board's, which makes everything that followed complicated. Because if every student is precious, then decisions about mental health services, student dignity, safety, and basic governance should not feel optional. They should not feel rushed. They should not feel dismissive. And they definitely should not feel like an afterthought squeezed between procedural confusion and personal power struggles. But here we are. The first section of the meeting featured student spotlights. And honestly, this was the high point of the night. Students from across the district spoke about academics, athletics, leadership programs, inclusion, school spirit, and community. They were articulate. They were upbeat. They were invested. These were not disengaged kids. These were not apathetic teens glued to their phones. These were young people doing exactly what adults are always complaining kids do not do anymore. They were participating. They knew their schools. They knew their programs. They knew what was working and why it mattered. So naturally, the adults responded by not matching that energy. Midway through the meeting, the teachers' union president spoke calmly, clearly, without theatrics. He outlined the consequences of recent decisions, eliminating licensed clinical social workers, shutting down a specialized independent study program, declining revenue options that could have preserved both. Translation: we removed student support systems and called it fiscal responsibility. Here is something student-focused advocates have been saying for years, and it keeps proving itself true. You cannot cut your way to student success. You cannot tighten the belt around mental health services and then act surprised when outcomes get worse. These were not abstract line items. These were lifelines. And what stood out was not just what was cut, it was how. Limited listening, no follow-up, canceled collaboration. Because when leaders stop listening, they do not become decisive. They become disconnected. Then came public comment. And this is where the students really poured the wine. One student stepped up to talk about urinal dividers. Yes, bathroom dividers. Stay with me. He explained that students avoid using the restroom because there is no privacy. They wait in line for stalls, they are late to class, or they just do not go at all. Meanwhile, the district has spent serious money on large-scale facilities projects. So the question was not, can we afford dividers? The question was, who decides what dignity is worth? Because when privacy is optional, students get the message loud and clear about where they fall on the priority list. Then another student spoke, Indigenous, elected, exceptionally composed. He addressed the board president directly and reminded the board of something basic, but apparently necessary. Under California law school boards exist to advocate for students, not manage personalities, not posture for future elections, not win internal power struggles. Advocate. And then he asked a question that should echo in that room for a long time. Why would you want this job if students are not the priority? That is not disrespect. That is accountability. From there, the tone sharpened. Students described prior meetings as chaotic, disrespectful, and embarrassing. One cited board bylaws. Another raised alarms about the lack of a required drug prevention program, pointing out not just student harm, but potential loss of federal funding. Let me repeat that. Students were reminding adults about compliance requirements. That is not activism. That is unpaid consulting. And instead of this becoming a wake-up call, the meeting pivoted to something else entirely. Board officer appointments. What followed was nearly an hour of procedural confusion, failed motions, recesses, personal grievances, and public power struggles. At one point, a board member referenced calling a parent for advice during the meeting, which is bold. Students sat there, educators waited, the public watched. Here is the part no one wants to say out loud. When boards spend more time managing themselves than serving students, the system is not broken. It is revealing itself. The contrast was painful. Students came prepared. Students respected the clock. Students understood the assignment. Adults argued process, delayed decisions, and centered themselves. This was not about left versus right. It was about values versus behavior. You do not get to say students first and then treat student time as expendable. You do not get to claim fiscal responsibility while cutting mental health support. You do not get to demand respect while modeling dysfunction. Democracy does not collapse in dramatic moments. It erodes in long meetings, in ignored comments, in decisions that quietly signal who matters and who waits. And the students noticed, which brings us to the moment many people are still talking about. Student board member Melissa Chai began to speak. She was mid-thought when board president Komrosky cut her off. The tone was curt. The cutoff was decisive. The message was unmistakable. Sit down. Time is up. We are moving on. Now, defenders of the board president will say this was about procedure, time limits, agenda rules, order. That explanation might hold water if this board had a consistent track record of enforcing those rules equally. But Temecula residents have watched meeting after meeting where adult speakers wander off topic, repeat talking points, push rhetoric, and somehow find their way back to the microphone again and again. Funny how procedure suddenly becomes urgent when the speaker is young. This is where context matters. When authority only enforces rules downward, it is not leadership. It is control. Here is the thing. Students were not rude. They were not disruptive. They were not grandstanding. They were engaged. And they were asking the same thing over and over in different ways. Are we actually the priority or just the backdrop? This meeting did not fail because students were too political. It failed because adults were too busy being personal. And when the most mature voices in the room belong to teenagers, that is not a youth problem. That is a governance problem. This has been uncorking the issues, pouring clarity into Temecula Valley politics. I'm Grapevine. Until next time, stay curious, stay local, and remember, when students are the most grown-up people in the room, something is very wrong.